When I first met her, she smiled like someone remembering a dream they once lived, soft, bittersweet, and a little broken. I didn't know then that her smile would change my life, or that she'd see in me the shadow of the man she once loved. I moved into the neighborhood at the end of summer, the kind of quiet street where time doesn't hurry, where the trees hold their breath and even the wind seems polite. Every house looked lived in and loved, except one. 2 doors down stood a pale stone house with its curtains always drawn, its garden overgrown but not wild, like someone once cared deeply for it and then simply stopped. On my 3rd evening, I saw her. She was kneeling by the gate, gathering spilled groceries, a jar of honey rolling toward the curb, a loaf of bread resting in the dust. I rushed over before I could think. "Here, let me help," I said. She looked up, and for a second, the world went still. Her eyes weren't the kind that searched, they remembered. Deep, quiet eyes framed by faint lines that made her beauty feel lived in rather than worn. "Thank you," she murmured, her voice low, careful, almost apologetic. I handed her the jar, and as she reached for it, our fingers brushed. Just a moment, but enough to feel the softness of her gloves and the tremor in my pulse that followed. She smiled faintly, the kind of smile people give when they're not used to being seen anymore. We stood there, surrounded by the ordinary sounds of the street, a barking dog, the faint rustle of leaves, and yet it felt like something had quietly shifted. She nodded toward her gate. "I'm afraid my hands aren't as steady as they used to be. I can help you carry the rest inside, if you'd like," I offered. Her hesitation was brief, almost invisible, but I saw it, a flicker of uncertainty before she said, "If it's not too much trouble." Inside, the house smelled faintly of lavender and old wood. Framed photographs lined the hallway, a woman younger but unmistakably her, smiling beside a man whose warmth seemed to live on only through glass. As I set the groceries down, she thanked me again, her voice gentler this time. "I'm Mrs. Halden," she said. "I'm Daniel," I replied. Her eyes lingered on me for a moment too long, not out of recognition, but remembrance. Then she smiled, thin but sincere. "Welcome to the neighborhood, Daniel." When I left, the sun was dipping low, spilling gold across her windows. And for the first time since I'd arrived, I noticed, one curtain had been drawn open. A few days after our first meeting, I found a small envelope slipped under my door. Inside was a handwritten note, "Thank you again for your kindness. If you ever have time, I'd love to offer you tea. M. Halden." The handwriting was neat, elegant, the kind that belongs to someone raised in a different rhythm of time. That Sunday, I went. Her house looked softer in daylight. The curtains were half open now, and the faint music of a piano floated out, hesitant, like the echo of a melody once familiar. When she opened the door, she seemed almost surprised that I'd come. "I wasn't sure you'd accept," she said with a smile that tried to hide relief. "I don't usually turn down tea," I replied. Inside, everything felt touched by memory, shelves of old novels, the faint scent of sandalwood, a window framed by lace curtains that filtered the sun into tender gold. A porcelain teapot waited on the table, 2 cups beside it, like she'd been preparing this moment longer than she'd admit. We sat across from each other, and for a while, silence did most of the talking. I noticed the way her hands curved around her teacup, as though holding warmth carefully, not to spill it, not to lose it. She asked about my work, my family, my reasons for moving. I told her about the new job, the unfamiliar quiet of the neighborhood, and how peace can sometimes feel lonely when you're not used to it. She nodded, a slow, knowing nod. "I used to host small gatherings here," she said softly. "Friends, music, laughter. It used to feel alive." Her eyes wandered toward the framed photos on the mantel, her younger self beside the same man from before. She traced the rim of her teacup with a finger. "It's been a long time since someone new sat here." I didn't know what to say, so I just smiled, the kind that hopes to say I understand without words. A light breeze stirred the curtains, carrying in the scent of the garden, overgrown yet fragrant. For a fleeting moment, she looked content, her gaze turning toward the window where sunlight touched her face. And in that quiet, with porcelain clinking softly and the clock ticking in rhythm, I realized something simple but profound: she wasn't inviting me for tea. She was inviting life back into her home. It started with a cloud that looked harmless, soft, silver-edged, drifting lazily above the rooftops. But by late afternoon, the sky had turned heavy, and the sound of distant thunder began to hum through the street. I was passing by Mrs. Halden's house when I saw her outside, struggling to move her potted plants under the porch. The wind had picked up, and rain was already spotting the stones. "Let me help," I called out, jogging over. She hesitated, that familiar pause she always had before accepting help, then nodded. "If you don't mind getting wet." We worked in quiet rhythm, lifting pots, pushing the heavier ones under shelter. The air was thick with the scent of rain and earth. By the time we finished, the storm broke open, sheets of rain pouring down, drumming against the roof like applause from the sky. "Come in," she said, brushing water from her sleeves. "You'll catch a cold out there." Inside, her home felt different this time, dimmer, softer, wrapped in the hush of rain. The only light came from a lamp by the window, its glow golden against the gray outside. She handed me a towel, and for a moment, our fingers met again, warm from her touch, cold from the storm. A simple, human thing, yet it carried a kind of quiet electricity neither of us mentioned. "I haven't heard rain this loud in years," I said. She smiled faintly. "It used to calm me. These days, it just reminds me of waiting." "Waiting for what?" "For it to stop." The way she said it, not about the rain, but about something deeper, stayed with me. We sat near the window, cups of tea between us, watching the world disappear behind the storm. The silence between us wasn't empty, it was full of things not yet spoken. Then, softly, she said, "You remind me of the man I used to love. Not in the way you look, but the way you listen." The air seemed to pause with her words. I looked at her, unsure how to respond, and she smiled, not sadly this time, but with something like relief, as if saying it freed her from a weight she'd carried too long. Outside, the rain kept falling, steady, endless, and strangely comforting. Inside, for the first time, it didn't feel like waiting anymore. After that rainy afternoon, something shifted between us, not spoken, not planned, but quietly understood. I started visiting her more often. Sometimes I brought groceries, sometimes I just stopped by to check on the plants we'd saved from the storm. One morning, as sunlight spilled across her porch, I noticed her standing by the window, looking out at her neglected garden. The flowers had wilted, the paint on the fence had begun to peel. It looked tired, much like the house once had, before she started opening the curtains again. "You used to have roses here, didn't you?" I asked. She turned, surprised. "How did you know?" "There's still a trace of them," I said, pointing to the stubborn little stems clinging to the soil. Her expression softened, a mixture of nostalgia and guilt. "I stopped tending to it after my husband passed. It felt wrong to make it bloom again without him." I didn't reply right away. Instead, I knelt by the flower bed and brushed my hand across the soil. "Maybe it's time to let it bloom for you." That afternoon, we began. The work was slow, weeding, trimming, repainting. She wore her old sun hat and gloves, laughing quietly when a streak of paint landed on her wrist. I hadn't heard her laugh like that before. It wasn't polite or careful, it was real. There were small, unspoken moments between us, her hand brushing mine as we passed tools, the warmth of her shoulder near mine when she leaned down to check the soil. None of it meant to happen, yet none of it felt out of place. At one point, a breeze lifted the edge of her hat, and I reached out instinctively to fix it. My fingers grazed her temple, and she froze, not from discomfort, but from the kind of awareness that makes the world hold its breath. "Thank you," she murmured, her voice quieter than the wind. By the time evening fell, the garden looked different, not finished, but alive again. She stood there, hands on her hips, cheeks flushed from the sun. "I'd forgotten how good it feels to be tired for something beautiful," she said. I smiled. "You brought it back to life." She looked at me, that soft glimmer in her eyes returning. "No, Daniel," she said gently. "We did." And as the last light faded, I realized she wasn't just talking about the garden. By the time summer deepened, visiting her had become part of my days. It never felt planned, more like a quiet pull that drew me toward that small, sunlit house at the end of the street. That afternoon, I stopped by to help fix a shelf in her sitting room. The garden outside was in full bloom now, bright, alive, carrying the scent of new beginnings. But inside, the air still held the weight of memory. While I was tightening a loose hinge, something caught my eye on the floor, a framed photograph that had slipped from the mantel. I picked it up carefully, brushing away the thin layer of dust. It was her, younger, radiant, standing beside a man with kind eyes and the kind of smile that made you believe in peace. Her husband. She entered the room just then, holding 2 glasses of lemonade. When she saw what I was holding, she froze. The sound of the rainstick clock on her wall filled the silence. "I'm sorry," I said, placing the photo gently on the table. It fell. She set the glasses down, her fingers tightening slightly around one of them. "That was taken the summer before he passed," she said quietly. "He used to stand just where you are now, fixing everything I managed to break." Her attempt at humor faded into a tremor. I saw it, the way her shoulders straightened, as if holding herself steady against the wave of memory. "He was kind," she continued, her voice soft but certain. "Not loud or grand. Just kind. You remind me of him sometimes." Her eyes met mine, and for a heartbeat, I forgot to breathe. There was no comparison in her gaze, no confusion, just a recognition of warmth, of presence. I didn't know what to say. The only thing I could do was reach out, brushing a fingertip along the edge of the frame before setting it upright again. "He must have loved you deeply," I said. Her hand covered mine, light, hesitant, trembling slightly. "He did," she whispered. "And I thought that kind of love only happens once." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was full of everything we couldn't name. The weight of loss. The pulse of something new. When I finally left that evening, the photograph still stood on the table, but beside it, she'd placed a small vase of lilies. Something told me she hadn't done that in years. It had been weeks since the day of the photograph, and though we never spoke about it again, something unspoken lingered between us, not heavy, not awkward, just there. Like the faint echo of a song you don't realize you're humming until someone points it out. One evening, she asked if I'd like to walk with her. The air was warm, the kind that hums softly before autumn begins to settle in. She wrapped a shawl around her shoulders, and as we stepped outside, the world felt smaller, just the quiet street, the sound of crickets, and the soft rhythm of our footsteps side by side. For a long time, we didn't talk. And that silence wasn't empty, it was safe. The kind of silence that lets you think without feeling alone. She finally broke it with a question that caught me off guard. "Do you ever think about how people see us?" I glanced at her, unsure how to answer. "Sometimes. But I try not to let it decide what feels right." Her smile was gentle but tinged with something bittersweet. "I used to care so much about what people thought. About doing the proper thing, saying the proper words. But grief, it changes your rules." She looked up at the sky, a fading blue streaked with orange, and for the first time, I saw her not as someone broken, but as someone still learning how to live again. "You said something once," I reminded her. "That time doesn't heal, it just teaches you to live differently." She turned to me, her eyes soft in the dim light. "And what has time taught you, Daniel?" I thought for a moment. "That some people arrive quietly, but they change everything." She stopped walking then. For a breath, she just looked at me, her shawl slipping slightly from her shoulder. I reached to fix it, my fingers grazing the fabric near her collarbone, a fleeting touch, but it carried more meaning than any word could. Maybe, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, we were both waiting for someone to remind us that life doesn't stop just because love once did. The streetlight above flickered on, painting her face in a warm, amber glow. She smiled, not with sorrow, but with peace. We didn't need to say anything else. We just kept walking, arm in arm, as the world around us slowed to listen. The first thing I noticed that morning was the light. It spilled across the street in soft gold, catching the windows of Mrs. Halden's house. For the first time since I'd moved here, her curtains were fully open, sunlight streaming through like an invitation. It stopped me in my tracks. That small, simple change meant more than words ever could. I walked over, carrying a few freshly cut flowers from her garden, lilies and roses, the ones we'd planted together. When she opened the door, the light behind her made her seem almost translucent, like the house itself had finally breathed again. "Daniel," she said, smiling in that calm, grounded way that always made time slow down. "You're early." "I thought I'd bring these," I said, holding out the flowers. Her eyes softened. "They're beautiful." I'd forgotten how much I loved lilies. Inside, the home felt different now, not heavy with memories, but alive with them. The scent of brewed coffee drifted from the kitchen, and on the record player, a soft piano melody played, the same one that used to sound lonely, now somehow full. She placed the flowers in a vase near the window, where sunlight touched every petal. "It's strange," she said quietly. "For so long, I thought opening those curtains would hurt. Like letting the world in would mean letting go of what I still had left of him." She turned toward me then. But I realized something. Maybe it's not about letting go. Maybe it's about letting light in again. I nodded, feeling that truth settle somewhere deep inside me. We sat by the same window where we'd shared tea months ago, the same spot where she'd once spoken through silence and grief. Now, her hand rested gently over mine, not in hesitation, but in peace. Outside, children's laughter drifted from down the street. The world kept moving, but inside that small house, everything felt still, but alive. "You've done more for me than you know," she said softly. "You reminded me that life can be kind again." I smiled. "And you reminded me what kindness really means." For a long time, we didn't speak. We just sat there, two people from different stories, sharing the same quiet chapter. And as the sun climbed higher, lighting the room in warmth and color, I realized something simple and certain. Sometimes, love doesn't return to replace the old, it returns to teach the heart how to open again. If this story touched you, don't forget to subscribe for more slow burn love stories like this one, stories about healing, second chances, and the quiet ways people find their way back to warmth. Leave a comment below and tell me. Do you believe love can return in a different form?